So for this one, I decided to follow the hero's journey plotline. And like I mentioned before, I made sure that the two main girls' friendship followed romancing the beat, even though that's romance, but it kind of followed those main beats loosely. And so then once I decided I was going to do the hero's journey, I take an Excel sheet and I start with like 44 scenes that I know I'm going to need, and I plot them according to what beat that's supposed to achieve.
Hello, and welcome to the Fangirl Feels podcast. My name is Olivia.
My name's Tanya.
And we're the podcast where we're two friends where we just dish about all the books, TV shows, movies that we're obsessed with. And today we have an exciting conversation. We are talking to author Hayley Whiteley, her new book that was released, her debut fantasy novel that was released this January, Ink and Ore. Say hi, Hayley.
Hi. So fun to talk to you guys today.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. It's so exciting. We love when these author chats. We want to do more of these. They're really great. So today we're going to talk to her about her debut fantasy novel, learn more about it, her process, and just get to really understand what it takes to be a debut fantasy writer. So at first, we would love to hear about you and learn more about you, your background, and what inspired you to write this series.
Yeah, so I am a stay-at-home mom right now. I have a little baby. He's 8 months old. And I just live with him and my husband. And I used to be an engineer. I was in systems engineering, and now I just stay home with my baby.
That's awesome. That's the dream, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I really love it. Like, I always wanted to be a mom, and he's like sleeping in the other room right now, so it worked out pretty well. But I live in Florida. I moved here a few years ago, and I'm from Alabama originally. And I've always been into writing. Like, I've wanted to be a writer forever. And this series, I came up with the original idea for it when I was like way younger, like a teenager, and I never finished it. So once I was in my 20s, I decided to try again and write it. And I actually finished it.
That's really cool. So you've had this idea for a while, it sounds like. That's awesome.
Yep. I like in the middle, I started a bunch of other stories. Like, I have way too many ideas, and I never finished any of those either. And when I decided to like give writing another chance, this was the one that I really like. It had bothered me that I didn't finish it because I loved my characters, and I was just like more determined to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. You said that you've like always written like growing up. What were some of your favorite books growing up?
I have a bunch. Like, I like a lot of like classics, like the Little House on the Prairie books. I would read those, and like Anne of Green Gables, and just those kind of like sweet non-fantasy books. And then of course I liked like Harry Potter and Twilight and all the popular fantasy books. I mostly did read fantasy growing up because it's just like my favorite thing, and that's why I wanted to write in it.
We can definitely relate. I was going to ask if you were a Twilight person, and that's something we've brought up before, that it kind of like started our like interest in like specifically romantasy books. So it's cool to hear that that was also like a part of your upbringing.
I don't know, I'd been reading fantasy for a while before that because it was the main thing I liked to read, and I was so excited when I saw that book in the library, and I still remember it.
I feel like the Twilight to fantasy author pipeline should be studied. It is, I can't imagine the amount of people that were inspired by the Twilight series. There's so many.
It gave all of us hope.
It did. It changed a generation, honestly. We're all changed. But that's awesome. So before we deep dive further into the book and learn more about the series, we wanted to let's chat about the things that we're into this week, all the books, movies, shows, things that we're watching or reading. I'll go first. I have been reading Spark of the Everflame on Kindle Unlimited. It is a romantasy series, and I ate it up. I'm just eating it. It is candy, like I said. You know, these books are just like, you just devour them. So that's what I have been doing. I deserved some candy this week, so that's what I did. So that's what I'm reading this week. I don't think I'm watching anything this week. Hayley, what about you? What are you reading, watching, anything this week that you want to shout out?
So this week the book I'm currently reading is Long Live by D.B. Lacey, and it is so good, but I'm actually not really reading it this week because I'm pretty behind on like finishing up my draft of my next book to meet the deadline. So I'm like on a no reading ban. So I'm like really behind, but it's a really good book, even though
That's,
I'm forcing myself not to read it.
that
And
sounds good.
yeah, she's actually, you mentioned Spark of the Everflame. I think like, her and Penn, who wrote Spark of the Everflame, are like in the same like writer group and stuff. And they're both really nice. I read that one back in like November and I loved it.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. That's really cool. It is really, I read the first book. I think I started it on Sunday. It is now Tuesday and I finished it. Like I never read that fast. So these are those books you can just like, yeah, go through them so quickly. So fun.
Yeah. I only read Spark because once I heard that like the audiobooks are coming out, I decided I was gonna save the other ones for audio because I mostly just listen to audiobooks right now instead of like reading on my Kindle.
Oh, I didn't know they're coming out in audio. I gotta check that out too.
Mhm.
Audio is
Yeah, I
great.
think that Spark is already out in audio. I don't know if the others are yet, but yeah, I never listened to audiobooks until I had my baby, and then now it's like almost all I do because it's easier to just like put it on and like interact with him and stuff.
Yeah, we found that to be a pattern. Like people who previously didn't listen to audiobooks, like, and then once you just start doing it all the time because you just find how easy it is. Like you're doing the dishes, you're listening to an audiobook, you know?
Yeah, it's nice, and you feel like double accomplished.
It's
Right.
true. I love, yeah, you get to like work on something. Cleaning while listening to an audiobook is the greatest invention on earth. It's like a life hack. You'll clean so much when
A
you listen.
loophole. Yes.
It is a loophole. You enter like a time vortex. And you're like, wow, I cleaned my whole house and read a book. Amazing.
Yeah,
Successful.
exactly. And then I'm watching the show The Circle on Netflix. Have you guys watched that? It's like a reality show, and they're like stuck in their apartments, and they have to communicate with each other through like social media and try to basically like win a popularity contest to win the money. But it's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
I
I've
have watched it.
I've
Yeah.
seen season 1. I haven't kept up with it, but is it good this season?
Yep. I'm so into it. I like always watch reality shows. Like my thing.
Are you Love is Blind girly? Have you watched that?
No, I think I watched like half of the first season of that and I got so like, I don't know, I thought they were like annoying and I didn't
I
keep
don't blame
watching
you.
it.
I don't blame you. It is you kind of have to turn off your brain cells. Turn everything off to watch it. But it's fun. The Circle is good. I think I've watched like 2 seasons. It's interesting because it's one of those like those social deception games, almost kind of like Survivor, but through social media, where you have to, like make alliances and things like that. I thought that was interesting. So I do like that show. Okay, Tanya, your turn. What are you watching, reading, devouring this week?
Devouring it, I did devour a book. Well, I finished Fallout, the series, which is very good. It's on Amazon Prime. Would recommend. But then I started Rebecca Kwong's book Yellowface, and I finished it in like 4 days through audiobook. Very good. I just love books where it's like you just want to keep listening to what happens. She kind of keeps you like you can't just stop halfway through. You're like, oh, I gotta get to the rest of this. And I typically like whodunits, like how things happen books, mystery novels, if you will. And so I love the book. Have either of you listened or heard of that book, Yellowface?
I've seen it everywhere. I actually don't know if it's like a memoir or a novel though.
It's a novel. It's the premise is honestly a little bit like it's a little silly. And I think she'd admit that too. Where it's essentially like a woman dies and another person like steals her book and like writes it as if it's her own.
Oh, interesting.
I have heard of it. I've heard it's really interesting, like understanding like race in the publishing industry. And yeah, I've been wanting to read it, but it hasn't been high on my list. But if you recommend it, I can push it up.
It's good. It's good.
Okay. Okay. So we can move on into the main discussion, which is your book, Ink and Ore. Tell us a little bit about it, the Kerafin Chronicles. What's like a brief description of the book? How would you, like, for our listeners who may have never heard of it, how would you describe it, a synopsis? And yeah, let us know a little bit more about the book.
So it's a young adult fantasy book. I usually say it's like Divine Rivals meets Shadow and Bone because it has like sort of some of the World War One vibes and like letters as a theme. And then it also is like takes place in the 1800s and has sort of a similar vibe to some of the magic stuff going on and like the wartime setting. And so it's about basically two friends from different countries. They they mainly communicate through letters because they're like pen pals, but they're best friends and their countries go to war and they find through one of the letters that they've actually come into possession of a letter saying that the war started over a framing. And so they think that if they get the truth out there, the war between the countries will end. So they go on a quest to try to end the war. And that's mainly what it's about.
That sounds really cool. I read the back, like the description behind it too. It's really interesting. I really like books that like I feel like female friendships are often not the center of books. So I like that your book starts with this like female friendship in the beginning. I really enjoy that. I think that that's unique in the fantasy space.
And I started a little bit. I'm within the first chapter, and like I'm gonna say, everyone, I'm hooked. I want to keep reading. So yeah, and I agree. The female friendship right away is great. It's just nice to read sometimes.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I like their friendship was sort of just the first thing. I've never really like tried to come up with an idea for a book. They just sort of come to my mind and then I like flesh it out. And just them as like two friends from different countries, that was like kind of where the idea first started. And so I wanted to make sure to like keep them both, like make sure they have the same amount of chapters and they are two different people that the reader can relate to instead of just having like one person that they're mainly relating to. And it does have both of them have like their own love interest with like some kind of romance subplot. But for the main, like I plotted their friendship arc to go with like the main romancing the beat, like that relationship arc. So like their relationship is the main one that develops along the way instead of the romance.
I love that. I am a big fan of romance as a subplot. That's like my jam. So I appreciate that the female friendship is first and foremost. Really rare also in the fantasy romantasy space. Would you describe this as a romantasy, or what genre would you put this book in specifically if you had to say?
Um, like I'd say it's a romantasy sometimes because I feel like it has enough of the same vibes and it is like a fantasy that has romance subplots. Yeah, I usually either just like say it's either romantasy or like sometimes I'd say gaslamp fantasy because basically just means that it takes place in like the 1800s, kind of like late 1800s. So it has more of modern technology and also kind of it means that basically everybody's a human and there's magic rather than like a high fantasy where you have like elves and fae and all different races.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of Gaslamp until today when I was looking up the genres of the book, and I love that. I love how you described that too, of just like it's humans within like a fantasy world. There's magic that exists. I feel like that's the books that we tend to read, Olivia.
Those are tends to be the ones I prefer. I mean, we all love our Akatars and our Fae books, but I do like these ones where it's human with a magical element to it. So that does sound really interesting. I've never heard of Gaslamp either.
A lot of gaslamp ones are set in like the real world 1800s, like in like usually England or like Victorian England. But some of them are set in made up worlds like mine. And I used to call it low fantasy because like there's high fantasy and low fantasy, and gaslamp is like a type of low fantasy. But I realized like some people thought I meant like, I don't know, it was like lowbrow or something, like lowbrow humor, like it was like 30 or something. And I was like, oh no, that's not what I meant at all. So I was hoping gaslamp would get the message across better.
That's so funny.
I get what you're saying though. I would have probably said low fantasy too, because if it's high fantasy, yeah, that makes sense. But I think, yeah, I like that. Now that I've learned something new today, gaslamp is like a way to describe kind of that in between. I like that.
I have a question before we move on to the next one, actually. I was curious. So the map is pretty important to understanding kind of like where the characters are from and how close they are and whatnot. I was curious how you went about creating your map.
Oh yeah. So I worked on the map like when I was first coming up with the idea, I thought, okay, well, maps are really key to like political plots and why wars start and everything and how they develop. It's honestly been so long ago that it's hard for me to remember exactly like what made me decide to do everything. But I wanted to just make sure that it made sense as far as like geographically how this continent might have been formed. And I also wanted to make sure that it wasn't similar to like any continent people would be familiar with. I mean, it obviously has a lot of like European influences in the culture. So I wanted to make sure that the actual geography was nothing like Europe, or at least not that much like Europe. And so it doesn't really, I just tried to make sure it didn't look like other places and it made sense. And I tried to set it up to where some of the like natural resources, like mines and stuff like that, would be at strategic places for where I wanted the story to go with the war. We haven't actually got there yet in Incanor, but I planned it ahead to where like I would have one map for the whole trilogy. So I thought about all those things when I was coming up with it to make sure that the trilogy art would work with the landscapes.
I think that's super smart that you did that. Yeah, just like setting that up beforehand sets the story and sets the world for readers. And I've read fantasy books where that's not really well thought out, and so then you find little, I guess, like issues with the plot where like it doesn't necessarily make sense. So I really appreciate that you did that, created that full world for us.
Yeah, and I remember I watched The Great Escape. It's like an old movie that I used to love. It takes place in like World War II, and basically, like at one point, there's a bunch of like officers trying to escape like a Nazi camp for prisoners of war. And at one point, like the guy is trying to leave Germany and go to France, and he just like kind of casually like walks up and like just grabs a bike and just kind of like casually rides his bike across the border. Um, in like Salzburg, I think. Not sorry, not Salzburg. What is that town? Oh, I think it's Strasbourg. Yes, that's the town. And I was like thinking, what? Like, there's not some kind of guards here at the border or anything. And it just kind of made me think about how, like, with smaller towns, you'll have people who live right next door to each other during a wartime, and like they can't, like, what are you supposed to do? Not talk to each other? And that kind of like inspired me too with these friends who live close and thinking about how these things would affect people in a small town. So that's why I wanted to make them like both live really close by the edge of the border like they do.
That's interesting. I really like that. I always am interested in how people come up with their book ideas. On this podcast, Tanya and I have talked a lot about how we would like to write a book one day. So it's always interesting to hear how people have like come up with their ideas or even just like that spark of inspiration. So I like that it just took that small thing of, oh, what if like these two friends were on the border of these opposing, you know, sides? What does that look like? I think that's really interesting. Like a cool gaze into your creative process. One question I have is, what elements of your world building and magic system do you think make your book unique or stand out in the fantasy genre? What are some of the elements of the magic system to begin with? I would love to learn more about that.
Yeah, so I think the magic system stands out because I think it's pretty unique. And so far, like a lot of readers have said they've really never seen anything like it, which is kind of like, I mean, it was really nice to hear. It made me happy. But so the magic system is there's a substance called the ore. It basically just like looks like metal powder, kind of like platinum colored is how I describe it. And basically, like, if you're a wielder, so you have like the power to wield the ore, and you also have the skills and you practice and stuff, you can make anything out of it at all. So, like, you could just instantly form like anything that comes to mind. So, like, a less experienced wielder would probably just make something like out of metal, kind of like bending in Avatar, like the last Airbender. But like if you're more kind of creative and more experienced, you could literally make anything at all. So you could make like a living creature or a house or just pretty much anything. And so you're mostly limited by your imagination and being like having access to the rare substance. And since it's so powerful, it's like something that, like a war would start over, and different political powers want it and also want the wielders so that they have someone to like do their bidding.
That's interesting. What were some of you mentioned Avatar: The Last Airbender. What are some like of the other inspirations that help you come up with this idea? I'm always interested in that.
I watched Avatar when I was like a kid every once in a while, but I never saw it all in order, so I didn't really know like the plot and stuff. So I actually hadn't had metal bending as a inspiration for it when I was like coming up with it. But then I saw that and I was like, oh, that's cool. But like I think that the main thing that I was thinking of is when I was in like mechanical engineering school, I was in like additive manufacturing of metals class. So that was like a really specific like elective we took. I just chose to take senior year. And that's basically like 3D printing of metals. Even since I've taken the class, I think that technology has evolved a lot. But at the time, there weren't that many ways to. It was like pretty challenging. So we were kind of like learning about the technology and how you could possibly overcome it and like the challenges they're facing right now. And I don't know. I was just thinking like that's something that you don't really see that much in fantasy magic systems. Is I don't know, like thinking about how much just simple manufacturing difficulties play into like wars and stuff. I don't know. I guess it's just a really practical way of thinking about it that made me think like, wow, that would be a huge advantage if you could just manufacture anything immediately. And that was kind of where it started.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like how you're just like even your background as an engineer played into you thinking about this space and this potential magic system. It's so interesting how we can take different pieces of our lives and make something creative out of them. That's really cool to see.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it's like that class. It probably sounds like it's just from me saying that, but like it was pretty boring. So like my mind really wandered a lot. And so that's like, I don't know, I'm always going back to thinking about like stories and stuff that I think is fun.
that's fair.
Is
Sometimes it's those things. Yeah. Go ahead.
that when you thought of the story, you were in the class and you're like, this has to be more entertaining?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like some professors kind of go on and on. It's like, we get it.
Right.
Was there a moment or experience that helped guide the narrative direction of the book? Can you tell us more about that? Like how you came up with the direction and the emotions in the book as you were writing it?
That's a good question. Well, I guess one experience that I had that comes to mind is like I grew up in the South, in the United States, and I was always like really interested from a young age in like traveling and visiting other countries. And I even had the chance to make some friends from other countries along the way. And from time to time, like I got some like comments about that. Like some people seemed to think that was weird, or like it seemed like some of my family members that had never traveled outside the United States had like misconceptions about other countries. And that experience kind of made me interested in writing something where there wasn't one good nation and one bad nation, but rather you got to see characters from several different places and empathize with like different people in the same book. I guess it made me like see the importance of just empathizing with people from different places.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that. That's really interesting. That and I think very relevant to our, day-to-day experience, especially now we live in a global society, right? We have to be able to empathize with different cultures. So it's really interesting.
My it probably kind of shows my age because like I mean stuff was not it's like technology changes so fast. Like stuff was not as global just even like a few years ago, and definitely when I was like a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. It has changed like so dramatically, but we're not isolated anymore. We have to be educated on the different cultures and countries and people around us. So that's cool that you brought that into your own book and your own story. That's really interesting. How do you approach character development in your writing process? This is something I'm always curious about as, again, an aspiring writer. Where are there any characters that you feel more particularly connected to? I'd love to hear more about that process of your character development.
Well, it sounds kind of cheesy, but I don't know. It's like I feel like my characters. I mean, of course I know they're characters, but they almost feel real to me. So it's like I don't even want to play favorites or something. I know that's kind of dumb, but I honestly like. I feel like whenever other authors say that. But I kind of like have some connection to each main character and each secondary character too. And I tried to make sure that none of them were too much like me, to where I was, really thinking about what would this character do in this situation rather than what I would do. But the main two characters, Brenna and Katil, they're both like me in different ways. Like Brenna's pretty like loud and outgoing, and she likes math, and she just really likes like making friends and stuff. And I can be kind of awkward and shy at first, but I tend to be kind of outgoing and I like to make new friends. So I kind of related to her more in that. And she makes a lot of jokes, and I usually tend to make a lot of jokes. But then Katil is like an only child, and she grew up in a really like rural area as an only child, and she's like pretty lonely. And I think that that leads her to like take a lot of risks that she might not have otherwise taken. And I definitely relate to that. I'm an only child and grew up. like I grew up in a rural area and sometimes like I just was like kind of alone. And so I felt like that was something I wanted to include there in a character. Especially like she's not that much like me in a lot of other ways. So that was one way that I connected to her.
I love that. I think one thing I've learned from like I write comedy is that like pulling from your real life like just helps people relate to it more. And so I love that you did that. That like this is obviously a fantasy world, but it pulls from relatable experiences, which just makes us want to read it more. I think that's great.
How I approach character development, I mean, it's something I'm trying to work on probably. Like you I don't know that I even do that well. I'm trying to get better, but one thing that I've done is trying to make sure that the character at the beginning is just completely different in some way to how they are at the end. And like not just that they're in a physically different location, but like that you can really see some sort of change in their personality. Like even if you were gonna draw a sketch of them, they would probably have like a different expression if you drew them at the beginning versus the end. So that was something I tried to make sure that they had like a whole arc and they had a real change.
Oh, that's interesting. I like you describing it as an expression. I'm an artist myself personally, and I love to draw characters. So even just seeing it that way is really, really interesting to me to think about. Like, what is that transformation that changes that expressions? That's really helpful.
Yeah, like oh, that's cool. Yeah, whenever I was like so when I was drafting this time, like not when I was, way younger and I tried to draft it, but the time that I actually like last year when I was drafting, I used what is that program called? I think it's Art Reader. It just lets you visualize your characters a little bit. And at that time everybody was using it. I don't know if anyone uses it now, but you had to like pick you can kind of like change their expression. And I found myself thinking like, well, am I doing Brenna at the beginning or Brenna at the end? Because she's not going to be the same. And I kind of had the same process when I was getting art commissioned recently from like a really good artist. So that was which was really fun to do. But I had to think about like which version is it, and that made me realize like how much they really did have a big, like a good art, I guess, and it made me happy.
Yeah, I remember I have used Art Breeder before too, sometimes just to help visualize like a character first. So I'm pretty sure people still use that. That's helpful. That's interesting. Okay, we'd love to hear more about your writing process. So, could you describe to us the journey from your initial idea of the book to its current state? And how did that story evolve during the writing process? And what challenges came up while you were writing it? I'd love to hear more about that journey.
So when I had the very first idea, I was a lot younger and I basically didn't know anything about like writing. I just, hey, I have an idea and kind of just started to like pants out a draft. And I was like so inspired that I made it a couple hundred. Well, I did draft the maps and then I started to just pants out a draft and I made it like a couple hundred pages in. Like I was working on this all the time. And then I kind of like wrote myself into a hole. Like I was like, oh man, the plot is kind of not adding up. And that was the point where I stopped doing it so often. And I eventually just never went back to it and felt kind of defeated. So then when I tried to do a bunch of other drafts and they kind of went the same way over the years. And so then this time I decided I was gonna change myself into a plotter so that I could actually like finish a story. Because I just felt like I think I have to do that. So I guess that was a challenge I faced is not actually finishing anything like over and over again. And so now my process is basically I like decide what genre this fits best in and like research the genre. So I read a bunch of different plotting guides and ways of plotting and examples from other books that I was familiar with and like decided what main plot I wanted to follow. So for this one, I decided to follow like the hero's journey plot line. And like I mentioned before, I also I made sure that the two main girls' friendship followed romancing the beat, even though that's romance, but it kind of followed those main beats loosely. And so then once I decided I was going to do the hero's journey, I basically just I take an Excel sheet and I start with like 44 themes that I know I'm going to need, and I plot them according to what beat that's supposed to achieve in whichever plot that I picked, which for that one it was the hero's journey. And so then I have my nice little Excel sheet and like a target word count for that scene and a little description of what it's supposed to be. And I like keep a status bar of like in progress, not started, started, that kind of thing for each one. And I go about it like trying to do one of those every day or every other day to get the whole draft out and like actually get it done.
That's interesting. Is there a particular site or something? You mentioned like the hero's journey, and then what was that second one you mentioned that was like about
Ro-
romance?
yeah, romancing the beat.
Okay.
So
Yeah, where did you find those? Like, is there like a site where these exist? Like these plot points?
so I mean, I think what I did was pretty much like it's kind of like I think what you would learn in like an actual creative writing class, but I just like looked up the information. I think they kind of like teach these typical, there's a few typical like plot structures. Let's see. Romance in the Beat, I'm looking it up now. It started as a book by Gwen Hayes. So yeah, you can either like read the book or just read. I pretty much read like effectively the Spark Notes version of them just to like learn what the beats were. And yeah, the hero's journey is the same way. I think that the main book that follows that is like one of the first ones was like The Hobbit follows that pretty closely, but it looks like it's a book too. So I guess if you could either read the whole long book or just like read an article and then map the article to your like read some articles and map the article to your spreadsheet is what I do, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I know like the hero's journey. Yeah, I in the brief creative writing experiences I've had, I know that
Yeah.
it's like a structure. I think it might actually be based off like an old Greek mythology. The Odyssey is coming to mind. I have no idea if that's correct, but I think it comes
Oh
from a really
yeah.
old book. I could be wrong, but
Yes, I bet that's where it came from.
yeah. So that's interesting. I'd never heard of these other ones. So that's cool that you were able to find some of these other structures to help you guide you during this process of planning this out. After, I think, like, even though you said that you had to change to a plotter because your other attempts failed, there's no such thing as failure. Clearly, those like helped you along your journey to get to finally completing the book. And I'm sure there were nuggets there that you were able to take with you. So it's cool to just see how you kept with it and you were able to keep going and you completed the book, which is the ultimate goal. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I definitely learned a lot. And along the way, I also wrote like fan fiction, usually just, I mean, always like published anonymously, but I got some like good feedback on that. And I had one that kind of got popular. And so that kind of like gave me some confidence to like, oh, people actually resonate with this and people, some people actually like this. And that kind of made me want to like really write something that was my own story instead of, fan fiction. But it was also a good experience.
That's interesting. I've heard other authors say this before, that fan fiction is a good way to test your skills. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it was nice seeing people's comments. Like people had, nice comments, and then every once in a while, like, oh, they didn't like, especially like the male love interest that I put in the main one that like people were reading. They didn't like stuff he did, and it kind of was like a nice intro into people like actually having, like reading your stuff and giving their opinions and all that. So that was cool.
That's really cool that you can like test your concept early, like what we call in like the business world minimum viable product MVP. So it's all relatable. It's all related. But I just think that's cool that you could like test that out in the market anonymously and then also get comments and feedback for you to improve. I haven't heard that. That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, this one wasn't a fan fiction though. This like it started as its own story. I kind of wish it was though, because then I could have gotten comments on this story. But at least I got comments on my like general writing skills, I
Yeah, you
guess.
still got like feedback on your writing, what works, what people resonate with. I think that's all like, yeah, valid and useful and valuable. We are UX designers and researchers by like our professional trade. So it's kind of almost what you were doing. You're almost putting out like I'm going to say usability study. That's not exactly what it is, but you're basically just getting feedback on writing and ideas and characters. So you did that without maybe even realizing. So that's very cool. Very interesting. My last question I have, right, for in this little section about your writing process is, were there any particular authors or storytellers that influenced your writing style, or even particular fandoms and fan communities? We don't want to out your fan fiction if you wrote it anonymously, but what were some of those authors or fan communities that inspired you?
I think one of my main inspirations is just like, I don't know, I really love like Disney movies, and I think that that actually ended up being an inspiration, especially how they have just a lot of like, it's not always like serious. And I mean, my books definitely isn't like dark fantasy. Like, there's just a lot of moments of just like kind of like levity and fun between the characters and stuff. And I sort of like that. So I think that that was something that influenced my writing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Disney movies, you can't really go wrong. They have the storytelling experience down pat, they're great inspirations for all of us. So I relate to that. Were there any fan
Yeah, and
communities? Oh, sorry,
you
go
can
ahead.
consume a lot of plots like really fast with movies versus books, unless you're one of those really fast readers, but I'm not.
Me neither. I'm reading this other book called The Lovely War, and I've been reading it for a month, and it's yeah, so I'm very slow. So I relate to that.
I don't know that I'm in many fan communities. Like, I'm a huge fan of Six of Crows in particular. And I guess I was kind of part of that fan community for a minute. And I'm also like a really big My Little Pony fan. And I did join the like Brony Club in college.
That's incredible. I'm
That's
obsessed.
a
That's amazing.
throwback. That's a
Yeah.
throwback. I remember when that was huge. That's so funny. That's really cool. That's awesome.
I know I still have like on Discord, the server, I have like my icon is Discord, the villain from My Little Pony, and like nobody ever gets it. I did have one person DM me about it, but yeah, I guess My Little Pony is kind of like failed, but it still matters to me.
That could be a whole episode on its own, is My Little Pony. So we don't want to get too distracted. We can come back to that. Oh
You'll have to
man.
come back for the My Little Pony episode. So that'll just be the topic.
We'll write it down. We'll prepare.
Yes.
A lot more fun than talk about my book, so I would love that.
So we do want to talk more about like that your profession is that you're an indie author now. And I'm so curious if you could tell us a little bit more about how being an indie author is today, especially with the world of social media, and if you can at all compare to like how things functioned previously. So I'm curious like what you've been doing recently to like generate awareness and interest in your work, and perhaps how has that changed from the past, because now it's kind of saturated, but you do have social media.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as far as like what it was like in the past, like like my book just came out, so I'm like very new to this, but I'm just kind of trying my best. But I think that I what I found most effective in generating awareness is, I guess, like having a street team. I put out a sign up for that in the fall before I even had like a cover or anything, just kind of thinking like I was hoping maybe 10 people would sign up to try to just like help me post about it. And I think I got like 70 signups like right away. I mean, I think it was like in just a few hours, and it made me really excited, and those people helped like so much. So I think that all of them have been definitely like the most effective way to generate awareness, just like posting about it and tagging me and stuff. And like it means so much to me. Like all the people that have helped me, it's just been so nice. Like I honestly can't believe that they would want to do that. And it really made a huge difference.
It
And
sounds like you spread awareness through like grassroots, like word of mouth.
yeah, I guess, yeah, like pretty much. And pretty much on Instagram, like I've tried different platforms, and Instagram has been the one where that like worked.
That's really cool. Yeah, I mean it's powerful. It's super powerful these days, and it can like change people's careers. And I only ask the past because I'm not aware of like how publishing existed before, social media with, before like 2006. So I'm curious like how authors have been approaching that recently. But so I'm so curious if you could share any memorable experiences or interactions that you've had with readers of the Kerafin Chronicles already.
Um, yeah, I've had some really good experiences. Several of them, like every time someone reads the book and they send me, like, especially there's a couple different points that when people get there, it seems like a lot of people will like DM me or text me and say like, oh my gosh, I got to this point, this just happened. And that's really exciting. And I just like love when they want to talk about it. I had my first signing in March at like my local Barnes and Noble here. And that was really exciting. It was like it was one of those where it was like just me. So I don't know, they even like advertised it, and that was really cool. And I tried to share it like on social media everywhere, like on Facebook. And I had several people come from a local like book club, and they brought me like a gift. And that was like so cool. They brought me like it was like a little Rapunzel gift. And so I think that was probably the most memorable experience because like I love Rapunzel and they saw that on my social media and it made me so happy.
That's so sweet. That's really nice.
That is so cute. Oh. So a couple more questions. I'm curious, what do you hope people take away from your book after reading it?
Well, I guess I just hope that in general they had like a fun experience and they were entertained. And I guess also maybe like thinking about some of the different ethics of nationalism and war and those kind of themes that I had going on in there, that they probably thought about that as they were reading as well. But mostly I wanted it to be fun. And I think that I think people have gotten that.
It sounds like it. It sounds like people like it. Yeah. And we're already into it just from, reading it a little bit. So yeah, I think hopefully people take away those elements as well. So what's next and how can people keep up with you? Where can we hear about your work and news?
The next few things I have coming up, well, the main thing I'm working on is book 2 of this series. It's going to be a trilogy, and book 2 is planned to come out in the fall, probably the beginning of November right now. And I'm hoping that book 3 will come out in 2025. So I'm mostly just trying to work on finishing that up. And I also have like a few different events coming up. So I'm really excited for those. Next year, I'm going to like Villains and Vixens. And that's going to be like, I'm really excited about that. So those things are kind of in the farther future. And how people can follow and keep up with me. The main way is through Instagram. I'm pretty active on there. And I also have a newsletter and sign up for that on my website. And if anyone like likes the book or they're just, want to keep up with everything, I also have a Facebook reader group that I post in and I'll like share stuff there earlier than I share it other places and like have more of chats with people who have already read the book.
That's really cool. Number one, that Village and Vixens, I think that's what you said, Village and Vixens meetup or event sounds very cool. What are some of your most favorite books of all time? What would you recommend to someone who's like, I don't know where to start. What should I read? What would you recommend to them?
Definitely Six of Crows. That's like one of my favorite books ever. And I always recommend it. And also the Three Dark Crowns series. It's like it came out a few years ago and I feel like I don't hear about it enough, but it's 4 books and it's like really good. Those are 2 of my favorites.
I've heard of this book, but I don't think I've read it. So, okay, I'm going to check that out. Sounds interesting.
It's really good. The author is Kendare Blake, and like a couple times I've posted about it and she's like interacted with my post and I was like really fangirling a lot. And she's gonna be at book conference that's in my town that I'm going to. It's Romanticycon or Romanticy Book Con. I'm going to that like just as a reader later this year. And so I'm like really excited to meet her and get her to sign my books.
That'll be awesome. I relate to fangirling when authors like your stuff. Very relatable. Also, the Fangirl Feels podcast. So, you're amongst friends.
Oh, yeah.
When we fangirl. Very cool.
All right, time for the games. Woo! And we're going to start off strong within this Would You Rather game. So I'm going to ask both of you, I'll ask all 3 of us, but would you rather have a love triangle like in Twilight or an enemies to lovers romance like in Pride and Prejudice? Hayley, you can go first.
Well, I guess I'd rather have an enemies to lovers romance because, well, especially compared to Twilight. I mean, I don't know. Her relationship with Edward's kind of weird, but I actually sort of had an enemies to lovers romance in real life with my husband, and he actually reminds me a lot of Mr. Darcy. And so, yeah, I would definitely pick that one. I even told him that. He's like, that means nothing to me because I haven't read that book.
Are you living my dream? Are you living my dream life? That's amazing.
But a guy like that, like, I mean, and I kind of was even thinking this about because I like even reading that book, I was thinking this. They're like they never really get that good at communicating though. So they're like always awkward at communicating. Like my
You're
husband is pretty much just like him.
well, clearly you're married to him, so you made it. You figured out a way. You made it work. We just didn't see enough of Jane or of Elizabeth and Darcy, you know. But I'm sure they would have figured it out. Also, I like to think so.
And like every couple in Bridgerton too. Yeah.
It's true.
Ooh, I
And
cannot wait for the next season to come out.
same.
Us too. It's soon. It's coming up next month. Very exciting. I would also be enemies to lovers. I like to read it, and I'm like thinking like also logistically how that would work also. So like I worry that I would tell my like mom and sister that I don't like this guy, and then when I started dating them, they'd be like, "But you told us that you don't like him. He's your enemy." So I'd have to do some convincing to be like, "No, no, now it worked out." But yeah, I agree that like the love triangle in Twilight's just it's too complicated. It'd take a lot of work. So definitely enemies to lovers.
And then you have to have a kid that then the guy ends up the other guy falls in love with. Like we don't need that mess. We don't need.
We could have avoided.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. What a nightmare.
It really is.
And your kid is like only a baby for like a few days. Oh my gosh, that would make me so sad.
So many issues there.
Yeah. Immediately no. No question.
So you mentioned that you like or are at least aware of Avatar: The Last Airbender. So this question might be relevant to you as well. So would you rather possess the powers of telekinesis like Eleven from Stranger Things or control water like Katara from Avatar: The Last Airbender? And I'll start off
Yeah.
because I've been a waterbender for ever since I started watching the show in the early 2000s. So I would just choose that for that reason. So what about you two?
This one's actually kind of tough, but I think I would say water because I'm pretty sure 11, the telekinesis like hurts her. Like, doesn't she get, like nosebleeds? So
Yeah, she seems like she's suffering a lot.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want that. I'll control water like Katara. That sounds nice.
I was gonna pick water for the same reason. The 11 seems like she's in pain or something. But I do love like Avatar, and I also love Stranger Things. But now that Avatar's on Netflix, I've watched it through like so many times.
All right. We'll do one more. Okay, this is a good one to wrap things up. Would you rather have a sidekick like Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings, who's always loyal and supportive, or a mentor like Professor Dumbledore, who's wise and guiding?
I think I would go with Professor Dumbledore, although is he actually the villain of Harry Potter? Maybe. But I just think a wise and guiding mentor would be nice. Not that nothing wrong with Sam from Lord of the Rings, but I feel like I have friends like that. And I would like a Dumbledore in my life.
Yeah, I guess I'll pick Sam because I mean you kind of already alluded to it, but like Dumbledore is sort of not that helpful. Like
You're not wrong.
he doesn't supervise Hogwarts like that well, I think.
He really is kind of the villain of the series, but it's true he's not that helpful. He gives you like little riddles and then you're expected to try to understand the riddle. Yeah, he's not very helpful.
Just be direct. Tell us what we need to know. Where do we go? We got the time turner. Tell us when.
Nope, none of that.
Yeah, and like I mean, it seems like they know that Voldemort's gonna strike like about every May. So they could kind of like reinforce the school. That
Wait,
was my thought.
I
love
didn't even
that.
realize that. Every May. That's so funny.
They have like a count. They are aware. Like he tends to come around in May.
It's like whenever the years are wrapping up.
You're not wrong, actually. I never thought about it like that, but you're totally. You think after like the second year, they would plan accordingly. Like I can understand maybe the year one, it's a fluke. Year two, yeah, nope, ill prepared.
I've been convinced. I was going to say Dumbledore, but then even while knowing that he wasn't necessarily the best person, but honestly, it'd be nice to have a friend that is like that follows you to Mordor. I think that's rare these days in the world of social media. So I'm going to say Sam. That would be my choice too.
It's a good answer. I regret my choice.
You got to stick with it. Yep. No.
Yeah, I'll stick with it. I get Dumbledore. the villain.
All right, that's all of our questions. Is there anything that we didn't bring up, Hayley, that you'd like to talk about?
Nope, I don't think so. You guys had really good questions, and it was really fun.
Good. No, it was great talking to you. This was really fun.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fangirl Feels. We meet every week to talk about all the books, TV shows, and movies that we're obsessed with. And you can now expect our episodes to drop towards the end of the week, around Friday. And we used to publish Monday, and so we're switching things up. So keep updated with us through Instagram. That's mostly where we publish like news. We're going to be talking about Legendborn Part 1 next week. And so if you'd like to keep up with these discussions, we're going to do 4 episodes for all the 4 parts of Legendborn. And so we think that people might have fun because there isn't really like, there's a deadline per se, but you can join these discussions asynchronously, meaning you don't really have to like participate. And there aren't many pages that you would have to read before each of these episodes. So you can keep up with the convo, and there's not a lot of work to be put into that process. So we'll probably be posting a post to our Instagram that asks if you have any thoughts or questions that we can bring up in the episode. So stay tuned. Otherwise, keep in touch. Leave us a voice message. Share with all your friends. Anything else, Olivia?
Like, follow, subscribe. Like, follow, subscribe.
Like, follow, subscribe.
Like, subscribe.
We just need a button that says that.
Yeah, like, follow, subscribe. That's it. Yeah, that's
So,
it.
Until then.
Till next week.
Bye.